Everyone has a favorite cuisine or favorite dish or drink. But if pressed, how many would struggle to say exactly why it's their favorite? Tom Vanderbilt is a journalist and a scholar, and his latest book is You May Also Like Taste in an Age of Endless Choice. And he joins us now on the complexity of taste. Welcome, Tom.
Great to be here, thank you.
It's really nice to have you here. So after I read your book, I was like, I don't know what I like, and I don't know why I like it or what it is that I like. It was very confusing.
I'm not sure I do either. So it is one of the most, the kind of hard problems of humans. And I think it only began for me because my daughter, who was then 4, asked me this question, the kind of question that kids ask, that the sort of things you've stopped thinking about yourself, but then a kid kind of throws you a right hook, and she said, what's your favorite color? I was like, God, when's the last time I actually thought about that? I told her blue. Blue,
you're wearing all blue.
It's a nice color, right?
Yeah.
But I thought, walking back home after dropping her off, I was thinking, like, why do I like blue? Is blue really my favorite? Do I have a favorite? Why should I have a favorite?
Mm-hmm.
And if blue was the favorite, would there be a reason for that? Some kind of biological reason, or where could I pinpoint that liking to? So that was kind of the beginning of this journey. There were a lot of other things in the air, also things that we're all experiencing in this day of kind of online life, about going to a restaurant, trying to decide whether you want to eat there. Take out your smartphone, there's 500 reviews. You read 2 that are great, one person hates it. Who are you going to go with? Do you end up leaving the restaurant? Or, life has become confusing, right?
Oh yeah, well, for sure. That's why when I read it, I was like, oh my gosh, I thought I knew myself, but I really don't know why I make the decisions that I make on a daily basis. And so in the book too, you write about 5 principles related to taste, the 5 C's. Let's go through them. We have categorical, contextual, constructed, comparative, and congenital. Can you go through them for us?
I think, humans love to categorize things. It just helps us make more sense of the world. There's a lot of, I think we're always trying to, it makes life easier to kind of process all this stuff that's out there. If we can just think about it, music, films, books, you go into a record store, if those ones that still exist, you see jazz, rock, you don't just see like all records just sitting there. But those categories are very powerful, and there will be people who will say, like myself, I would say something like, I don't really like modern country music, and that's kind of a ridiculous thing to say, but because it cuts you off to an entire sort of field of music that there might be actually things you like, but
somebody decided that song would be in that category, right?
Exactly, which is often a very slippery thing to do. And Prince was sort of like the classic case of an artist who was trying to transcend. From the very beginning, he did not want to be considered at his record company and to be an R&B artist. He wanted to be a pop artist to get out of what he thought were these limitations of that genre. And if you sort of could somehow mathematically analyze his music, as actually people do, sometimes it often really wouldn't fit in an R&B kind of space at all. It would be in rock or something else. So, a lot of artists have tried to do that. Not everyone can pull it off. I think he sort of became his own category. You could be like a Prince-like performer now, but for a lot of other people, it's more tricky.
The second C is contextual.
Contextual, I think, we all have taste, right? We have certain tastes, but they change. Throughout the course of a day. You start out with breakfast. You like to eat the same thing day after day, comfort food. Most people don't wake up craving novelty. You don't meet people at an Indian restaurant for breakfast. There might be exceptions to this, but another thing is, often we like things, more because of the particular place we're enjoying them or the people we were with. I've done this lots of times. We're being on vacation, buying something in that spot, bringing it back home, and kind of looking at the thing like, oh, what was I thinking? I really don't have a place for this in my house.
I do that all the time, especially when you're traveling.
Yeah. So my taste changed just in coming back on that airplane trip back home. So I think there's all sorts of ways. Just the things around us will influence how we feel about something in the moment.
And the third C is constructed.
Constructed, yeah. Now you're going to have to help me. I'm trying to remember what. I think all of our tastes are constructed to a certain extent. But the mere fact that my daughter asked me that question sort of put me on the spot. I may not have really had a favorite color, but this is what often comes up in focus group research, where people, it's called a forced choice exercise, where you have to pick something. Sometimes people actually might not really, at the end of the day, they will just go with something to make the interviewer happy. And so again, just showing how tastes can kind of emerge sometimes very quickly without our really knowing what might be behind something.
So the final number 4 and 5, comparative and congenital.
Comparative taste.
I guess that's probably when you compare two different things, correct?
Well, I'm also thinking of social comparison here, where, I mean, this is, yeah, God, I'll have to go back. Should we open the book and look at what comparative is? No, but we're always comparing what we like against other people, and we're often drawing those tastes because someone else likes that, or in fact, the opposite, because someone else. So another way of saying this is taste does not happen in isolation. You kind of need society. If, you know, think of a fashion trend that you kind of latch onto early on. Nothing changes about that clothing, but suddenly you see a lot of other people start to wear that thing, and something begins to click in your brain where, like, oh, I'm getting a little tired of, I don't feel quite as special anymore because everyone has that. So you're, you know, it's not the shirt's fault. It's like everyone else has that. You feel like you need to move on to something else. So again, in your own mind, it's still fine, but you're looking at what everyone else is doing, and that, I think a huge part of what taste is this kind of social learning and social imitation.
It's probably like when you're in high school and you think you're really cool, and then 20 years later you're like, oh my gosh, I can't believe I wore that, or I look like that, right?
Yeah, I mean, no one, and no one buys something thinking 20 years down the road, boy, this is going to look really silly.
Yeah.
You always think you're at the height of fashion whenever you buy something. You always think whatever you're doing is the, and there's a great study I like that asked people to, how much they would pay to see their favorite band from 10 years ago play now versus how much they would pay to see their favorite band now play in 10 years. And people always are willing to pay more for that band now in 10 years. Because they think that their tastes now are going to stay the same, even though that very exercise shows that they no longer like what they used to like quite as much. So our tastes are always changing, but we think we're always in the moment, we're going to be sort of forever.
Okay, and I wanted to ask you too about food, and you're right that food is the archetype of all taste. Why begin with food?
I mean, it is the thing that we all, of course, everyone has to eat. There are some, it's been estimated there are 200 food decisions we have to make a day.
Really?
Yeah, I mean, what, when, where, how, you know. And this is kind of the first way we were really expressing something like taste and liking. I mean, it was eating for survival, but once you sort of figured out you had enough to live on, you know, maybe you could begin to choose, well, I have cherries, I have apples, maybe which one do I want today? So I think a lot of there's certain primal mechanisms that if you sort of drink something that's drink some milk that's gone sour, you know, you will sort of like make this face. It's called the disgust face, the aversive gape, scientists call it. You kind of crinkle your nose, you open your mouth a little bit. You're actually your body preparing to potentially vomit to remove that food because it might be hazardous. I mean, surprise. We do not like surprise when it comes to food. I use the example of remember when salted caramels came out a number of years ago? It was sort of this big deal, like, wow, sweet
and sour.
Savory.
Can it exist together? Yeah.
You always had to tell people they were salted. I mean, if you just sort of gave people caramels, it was going to throw them, and they would kind of have this initial reaction. Or if you normally drink Diet Coke and someone gives you a regular, or vice versa, it's almost a shock to the system because you're, you know. So I think all of our other kind of tastes come from this kind of some of these primal mechanisms that we deal with food.
And I guess it makes sense because back in the day, if we ate something bitter, it could be poisonous.
Exactly, and even before we had language, you know, your face had to be able to send a signal to your kin folk in your tribe, whatever, that this is a bad thing. You do not want to eat this. So that's where the social learning really began.
And what criteria do we use to judge whether we like a certain food or not?
I think familiarity is really the thing that most of us, you know, cling to, I think, because it's the easiest. I mean, why should you always go out looking for new things when you already sort of know what you like, and that seems to do a good job. But that's right. I do think all liking is sort of learning. There's very few things we're sort of born liking. Sugar, we humans have sort of an innate desire for sweetness, maybe too much of a desire, right? But other things, you know, these things, it takes work. It takes, you know, and you think about the first time you drank, you know, perhaps coffee or alcohol. It probably wasn't a pleasant experience. It's a very bitter thing. Your body, again, sending up that primitive warning system, hey, this might be bad for you. But, you know, coffee, you have some nice caffeine. alcohol, I mean, beer, wine, you have that nice sort of alcoholic after effect. You get conditioned to like that thing. And people talk about an acquired taste. It's a funny distinction there, because are you actually coming to like the taste of that thing you had it the first time? Not really. Like your whole brain is sort of undergoing this change, and you no longer really are drinking that same drink. You're drinking something else. You've created this new sort of, the phrase has been used, a flavor object in your mind that it's not just a bitter drink. You've learned to associate it with something good, like this kind of, caffeine.
Oh, that's really interesting. What about picky eaters?
Yeah, I mean, there are a few food aversions that really do have kind of a genetic basis, but there are very few. I mean, really, if someone says they don't like something, I mean, I would guess that they just really haven't had enough exposure to it. Exposure is key. Psychologists talk about something called mere exposure. Just having something a number of times in a row, or reading something or listening to something will increase your liking for it. But a lot of us don't get to that second or third. And if you have kids, I mean, it's been estimated they need 10 food exposures of broccoli. They don't need 10.
I don't know how many parents get to 10.
Yeah, they don't need 10 Twinkie exposures. That one is going to work, because this is.
That's funny how that works, isn't it? I
Yeah,
guess
I
it's
mean,
a sugar factor, right?
Twinkies are just genetically designed to be, to go down very easily. I mean, and that's kind of another funny thing. They're such a simple sort of taste. They're so sweet. You're going to get tired of that a lot more quickly. There's sort of a interesting thing where another problem with this is like satiety. How quickly you tire of something, and this works for food or music. And if you eat too much of one thing, your body quickly begins to tire. And scientists think that it's sort of sending out a message from within that, hey, you need to eat a little bit more of a varied diet. You've had enough of this thing. Time to move on to something else. So the minute you begin eating something, your liking for that thing begins to decline.
Really?
And your body will eventually send you a signal, don't eat anymore. But if someone brought you something new, you'd kind of have this reset of your whole mental thing, and you'd kind of be a little bit hungry again, even though you may not have wanted to eat more. But you're going to like that new thing a lot more than that old thing you've been eating.
I mean, I like chocolate just as much as the first time I had it, but maybe that's an exception.
Certain foods have a higher threshold for satiety, definitely.
So how important is the language we use to describe food in setting up our expectations for it?
Huge. I mean, you go to a restaurant. I mean, the menu. A lot of work goes into making that menu sound appetizing, right? I mean, if you read it and you're saying, "Hey, that sounds good." I mean, it literally does sound good. There's words like crunchy or crispy that Mario Batali, I think, called innately appealing. So this is a thing where something like food is an interesting case, because unlike other forms of things we might consume, like music, food is really a multi-sensorial experience. You look at it, you hear it, you feel it, you think about it. I mean, everything's going on when you're eating. And they've done all sorts of interesting studies how the sound of a food, if a potato chip isn't quite crispy enough, people's liking will go down for that. I mean, you're not just, there's a lot going on when we eat. It's quite interesting.
I want to show you a clip, and you might remember SNL sketch featuring the late Chris Farley. He's playing a man on hidden camera show who's tricked into drinking decaffeinated coffee, and his reaction is not pretty. Let's take a look.
Sir, do you realize that you are not drinking regular coffee, but Colombian decaffeinated coffee crystals?
What?
I said you're drinking Colombian decaf coffee crystals.
What? You son of a bitch! You no good damn son of a bitch! You lied to me! You lied to me! And you told me this was
He was a genius. I mean, people are not going to react like that in a restaurant, but what happens when our expectations for certain foods are violated?
Yeah, I think they would have been better off not to tell him they had replaced it, and he's not going to have another exposure to decaf coffee, I think. But again, yeah, he was having this kind of, maybe it's a kind of a disgust reaction, and that's more of an angry reaction. But it does speak to the thing that we do know what we like. It may actually be that we like what we know, but people do get very attached to these things, and you don't sort of mess with your favorite thing.
What's interesting though, if no one had told him it was decaffeinated, would he have known that it was decaffeinated?
He might have sensed it initially, but it would take a little while for that new conditioning to kind of. But there's no reason he couldn't then acquire a liking for decaf coffee. I mean, the same way you acquire a liking for caffeinated coffee. I mean, these things can work both ways. Again, these things are not fixed or fluid.
Now, considering how malleable our tastes are, how challenging is it for companies to create food products that appeal to everyone?
Very challenging. I mean, even sort of testing something in a focus group environment. I mean, you bring people to sort of a weird laboratory. They're sitting in chairs under a certain light. It's kind of an artificial experiment. You try something 1 or 2 times. You may love it in the lab because it was novel, because it tasted good. You take it home, you sit with it a while. The consumers change the way they react to things. So, I mean, there's all kinds of problems like that. And just asking people how they feel about something is a very challenging. So a company like, I spent some time at McCormick, the flavoring giant in the U.S., and they hire a lot of different people. They have sensory experts. These are people trained to detect flavors, and for them, they don't want to know anything about whether they like it or not, because in that case, when you say if you like or dislike something, that will actually kind of throw off your whole sensory experience of that. To be really objective and really know what's going on in food, you have to kind of put liking and disliking to the side.
Because if you say that, then it implies that you should like it or you shouldn't, or you shouldn't dislike it, right?
I mean, there's just so many ways that an outside expectation or a kind of a what they call a top-down mental thought might throw off your actual sensory experience of putting that food in your mouth. I mean, they test under red lights, for example, so testers often can't see the actual color of, say, a gravy, because if it has a certain color of brown, people have learned to associate that with a certain flavor. So sometimes if you're looking for truly objective flavor, you need almost blind tests. But they also do consumer testing, and consumers, they're not asking what flavors you're detecting, because most consumers aren't experts in that. They simply want to know whether you like it or not. But expert and lay people taste rarely sort of matches up. Yeah.
How do they go about hiring experts for these foods that they're just creating, or flavors that they're creating?
There's kind of a testing process. One of the first things I know you have to do is sort of a triangle test. You taste 3 things, and one of those things is less like the other 2. So you have to pass kind of a succeeding threshold of these tests to ascertain your sensory abilities. But it's not necessarily just about having a good tongue. One thing that really surprised me doing this research is that people like sommeliers or wine experts, often it's really not about the sort of being born with some kind of inherently better set of taste buds. It's really this process of practice, of learning the language, learning all these obscure sensory descriptors. And every food out there in the world has these, they're called like flavor wheels. You'll see there's one for almonds, and it's a big wheel with all sorts of, I mean, to you or me, we probably think of almonds as sort of almondy.
And nutty.
Nutty. But they have all sorts of things, musty, and I think they even peanutty. Like it gets very crazy. But you have to learn this whole sort of way to think about the food, and that act of thinking about it sort of helps you unlock some of that sort of flavor experience. I mean, there's, the brain and the tongue work together in very interesting ways, and it's not really a one-way street. There's kind of a lot of interaction going on there.
You mentioned wine experts. What criteria do they use to, I guess, describe wine?
I mean, they do it in this very specific way, and sommeliers who are training to become an expert sommelier, they learn this very specific. It's a specific order, the way you talk about wine, country, grape, varietal, etc. And they've done studies where if you sort of mismatch those things and present them in a different order, it kind of messes up their minds a little bit, and their ability to pick out one wine from another actually drops off almost to the level of amateurs, excuse me. So, and wine experts in some ways can almost be more fooled than amateurs. They've done other interesting experiments where they sort of change the color of a wine, and the wine expert was the one thrown because they assumed, well, because this color it simply must be this sort of wine. Where an amateur was a little bit more open-minded, they weren't sure what to expect, and they were able to make a better identification. So,
you also went to a beer competition in Denver. What happened there?
Yeah, Great American Beer Festival. This is like the craft beer and all sorts of beer festival. And I was the first journalist to be allowed inside one of the closed judging rooms. And this is kind of a thing. They talk about taste, but they also have to decide whether they like it or not. And this is key difference here between beer and wine judges is that beer actually there are taste mechanisms in the throat, so you actually have to swallow beer to have the full taste experience.
Because in wine you spit it out, right?
Yeah, so they're served very small samples of beer.
I was going to say, don't they get tipsy after a while?
It is an occupational hazard, and but these guys, it's a very high-level, interesting discussion, and it reminded me a little bit of a poker game, though, at the end of the day, where a lot of the dynamic is interpersonal and social. If someone comes out right away and says, "I love this beer," there's a little bit of pressure on the other judges, no matter what they thought, to react to that person. They might be influenced by that. So there's a lot of careful randomizing, so people aren't seeing what other people are drinking, and can even be subtly influenced by a person's facial reaction. You take a little sip, and you're like, that could throw off your neighbor. Weirdly, at the end of the day of a long day of beer drinking, we had a beer. They sort of like a Pilsner, a very light beer, to kind of cleanse the palate of all that stuff. And I asked one of the judges, how do you decide even right now what beer to ask for? You have so many beers in your head. And how do you decide what's the best beer? And he said, well, or what's your favorite beer? He said, I don't have a favorite beer. I always like the beer I'm holding at that moment, because that's what sounded good to me. And I thought that was sort of a nice strategy for life, to just sort of be happy with the choice you've made and not think about all the other things that might be out there.
Now, all these experts telling us about all these different foods, are they fallible to, are the experts fallible guides to taste?
Experts can suffer from as many biases as lay people, and that's why all these competitions, the way they're set up, have safeguards where possible to, and there are things like written standards which try to kind of put into some kind of concrete practice what experts are supposed to decide is good. And the funny thing about standards is that they change all the time, and what is a good beer 1 year, 10 years from now, that definition may have changed. Something like IPA, just to get into kind of beer nerdiness for a minute here, has a certain IBU, International Bitterness Units. That used to be a much different figure a few decades ago. We're now drinking much more bitter IPAs than we used to, so our tastes have changed as a society, and the written standard, judges have to go back and, well, should we change the standard of what makes a good IPA now? So they're always having to make decisions like that.
So much to talk to you about your book. You're coming back to another episode of Agenda this summer, so we'll continue our discussion. But thank you so much for being here today.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Now, before we go, when food doesn't suit your taste, it often becomes waste. Here's academic Tamara Soma with some advice. Food waste around the world costs billions of dollars and takes an environmental toll too. Tamara Soma, a PhD candidate in urban planning at the University of Toronto, has some ideas that might help. She joins us now with ways you can cut down on wasting food at home. What are 5 ways people at home can reduce their food waste?
Absolutely. The first step, I would say, is to plan. Studies have shown that people who plan their meals in advance or plan their shopping list and stick to it will actually reduce their food waste. The second tip that I would give to people is to make the freezer your best friend. So if you made the extra soup, if you made that extra pasta or rice, put it in an oven-proof glass container, put it in the freezer, and then next time you come home from work, you just pop it in, and then you're ready for another meal. The third tip to reduce food waste, I would say, is to experiment, and don't be afraid to experiment. So leftover rice can be made into fried rice for a breakfast. It could also be put into soup. Old bananas can be put into smoothies or also made into banana bread. And also, we should experiment a little bit more. Don't eat just the broccoli crown, also eat the broccoli stalk, because it's as delicious and as nutritious. The fourth tip that I would recommend to people is to reduce portion sizes. Now, when we go to restaurants, we often have more than what we need. And you can always doggy bag it and bring it home. But the thing is, the portion sizes in many restaurants in North America is really, really big. So I think we need to talk to the nutritionists, we need to talk to our public health professionals and our politicians to talk about how we can reduce portion sizes in restaurants. And then the fifth tip, I believe, which is the most important tip, is to remember that food waste is a systemic problem, it's a systems issue. And so we need innovations within the food systems to address it. And this is where people like me, policymakers and urban planners, can come and create a closed loop system. So the fifth tip would be creating a closed loop city where waste is no longer seen as waste, but is actually a resource. It can be tied into urban agriculture and feed back into the production of food. And therefore, we can have a future without wasted food.
Thank you so much, Tamara.
No problem. Thank you.
Help TVO create a better world through the power of learning. Visit TVO.org and make a tax-deductible donation today.